Hello and welcome to CyberSite Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff. I'm the founder of LMG Security.
And I'm Matt Dern, the Director of Training and Research for LMG Security.
And today we're talking about really no ransomware.
Yeah.
Ransomware without the ransomware. Ransom extortion that depends on data leaks. And this is really the trend, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's becoming a lot more common when we see cyber extortion cases in general. I mean, in a lot of cases, we still do see ransomware get deployed. But in almost every single one of those cases, data is also stolen, and then there's the threat that it's going to be publicly released, that your company's going to be embarrassed, you're going to fall afoul of regulators. So it's become a very effective extortion tactic.
Well, it's interesting because this used to be called double extortion, where criminals were locking up your data and holding it hostage, preventing you from getting access to it. And then at the same time, they were also stealing your data, because why not?
Yeah, why not?
And threatening to leak it to the world. And I think over the years, hackers have realized it's actually just easier to steal data and threaten to leak it to the world.
Yeah, it's like significantly easier.
Yeah, and we'll go into that in a second. But I know there's been some recent news about the ransomware gang Hunters International,
Right.
which is spurring this conversation. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, so they've been around since like 2023, I think, give or take.
October 2023.
They basically got their start supposedly they got their start when they bought the Hive ransomware source code and created a kind of an offshoot ransomware group. And they have been moving pretty consistently away from the actual detonation of ransomware inside of networks.
They used to do double extortion all the time. And so word on the street is that now, when I say word on the street, I mean actually researchers from Group IB have found that they are planning to shut down their ransomware operations. And they're rebranding now as World Leaks. And what is the purpose of World Leaks?
I mean, World Leaks is basically a mass data broker. I mean, they're going to be specializing in leaking data as an extortion service.
Extortion as a service. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, similarly like Marketo, they used to be. I know that's an old example. We talked about that,
No,
but
that's fine.
But yeah, they're basically just going to act as that kind of forum where data can be leaked.
Okay, you can't just throw out the word Marketo without explaining it.
Okay, so Marketo is very similar to this. They were a data breach as a service, or extortion data exposure as a service kind of operation, and they were around for a while. The interesting thing about them, and I remember this from their website, was that they had a list of partners that they would regularly notify about the data that they had, and that included like the FCC and the FBI and other places like that, which I'm sure they just loved having their branding all over the site.
Computer and SC Media, so they would notify their, quote, partners, which were regulators and journalists, about companies they had hacked. And so that really brings up some ethical considerations as well, because if you're a regulator and you get a notification from a hacker that I have hacked this bank or whatever, what do you do with that information? Because, of course, by acting on it, you're empowering the hackers, you're adding to their leverage, but at the same time, can you just ignore that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a tough one.
I don't know. But anyway, so they're planning on rebranding as World Leaks, and they have this whole OSINT, open source intelligence platform, that's designed to help criminals extort people efficiently using telephone, social media, email. So really, this is part of that whole supply chain for extortion that we're seeing. We're getting these really niche, whatever as a service capabilities, in this case, extortion as a service capabilities. And all of these niche operators that have specialties and specialized programs to support that.
Yeah, and I mean, eventually, and I think Group IB is the one who said this in their report, but eventually, like, we see this just being how cyber extortion works.
Yeah.
And that goes for, I mean, we see that when we do a lot of things like our tabletop exercises.
Yeah.
If we do a tabletop exercise now that involves cyber extortion, we always include your data was stolen and they're threatening to leak it publicly. Because otherwise, in most of those cases, one of the members of the security team will just say, like, oh, we don't care, we'll just restore from backups and it'll be fine. But if your data's been stolen, well, you have other problems to deal with there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned restoring from backups. The other reason we're bringing this up today is because it is a trend that we are seeing on the front lines. And I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Net Diligence Ransom Advisory Board, which includes people on the front lines of incident response from, I think, over 40 different incident response companies. And so at our last meeting, one of the big trends that we called out is exfiltration only ransomware. And I hesitate even to call it ransomware because the technical term ransomware really refers to malware that is designed to encrypt your files.
Yeah.
And over the past few years, It's been used to describe cases where there's data exfiltration, but no actual ransomware. It reminds me of those old Polly-O string cheese commercials from the 80s, where they're like, I want a pizza, but hold the crust and hold the sauce, and it's like just cheese. So really, like, this is just cheese when it comes to extortion.
I knew you were going to bring that example.
I know you knew I was going to say that. But according to the Net Diligence cyber claims study last year, we are seeing a decline in the amount of ransom payments, which is great. And specifically ransomware claims, actually. So this is a study of cyber insurance claims reported by the insurance companies themselves. And when it comes to ransomware incidents, the average amount of a ransomware claim dropped dramatically in 2022 and 2023.
Right.
So this was a 2024 study. And that's great. One of the reasons we think that one of the contributing factors there is likely the fact that there is not as much business interruption when it comes to ransomware, because criminals are moving away from locking up all your systems, locking up all your data, and just stealing it. And so lots of IT folks are like, hey, I can just restore from backups. I don't care anymore. Or maybe they'll pay to have data not exfiltrated or not published, but they're not going to pay as much as they would if they were desperate and operations were down.
Right. And I mean, well, that's reflective of like the amount of effort that a criminal has to put in to steal that data, though. I mean, if you're going to go through and detonate ransomware inside of a network, there's so many things that you have to do. Like, first, you have to get your foothold, then you have to compromise system accounts, then you have to prime the network, then
what do you mean prime the network?
You have to set it up so that when you detonate your ransomware, one, it'll actually work, and two, it'll maximize kind of the impact of the attack at that point.
Have you deployed ransomware, Matt?
In controlled scenarios in the lab.
Ah, okay. So yeah, you prime the network, you get it all ready, because we've definitely seen cases where criminals try to push out ransomware and fail. They get shut down by EDR, or what else do they get shut down by?
Sometimes they just don't have the correct permissions to encrypt the files that they want to encrypt. Like the couple that went after IHG, the Holiday Inn.
I was just thinking of that.
Yeah,
the Holiday Inn couple.
They tried to deploy ransomware,
and they failed, and then they just deleted everything.
They
wiped
deleted the
stuff.
database.
Yeah, so ransomware is hard. The other thing that's hard about ransomware is that, yes, you know I'm going here. Ransomware today is typically based on asymmetric key cryptography. And what that is, you've probably also heard it called public key cryptography. So what one key locks, the other key unlocks. And the reason this is important for ransomware is that criminals will use one key to lock up all your data, and they have the secret key that can unlock it. Only they have that secret key. And that means they have to be organized. They have to keep track. Sometimes this is a different key for every computer they've locked up. So they may have to keep track of hundreds or thousands of different secret keys and map them to the correct victim and the correct system that's on the victim network. So that's hard.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. Sometimes it takes specialized software. And then on top of that, we have additional capabilities like we saw with Kaseya. I mean, what was the cool thing about Kaseya? Not that it's really cool.
Well,
but
I mean, it was
from a scientific perspective.
From a scientific perspective, we found out that the ransomware group in that case had Revil had a master key.
Yes.
So any affiliate of theirs, if there was a problem with either the negotiation or something like that, I mean, the regular Revil group could decrypt all of that stuff.
Yeah, the operators could decrypt everything. And so they offered a master key out there for $70 million that could decrypt everything. So that was fascinating. It requires a whole next level of organization and setup and tracking. When it comes to data exfiltration as a service, it's a lot easier.
Right.
You don't have to worry about tech support after the fact to decrypt your data. You're literally just smashing, grabbing, threatening to publish. And in some cases, we see that the criminals haven't actually stolen the data. They're pretending to steal the data.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, maybe they have a screenshot. I mean, I know you had at least one case where you didn't, as a forensic analyst, you thought that they probably didn't steal the data.
Yeah.
But we couldn't prove it.
And
the insurance company did cover, in that case, the payment to the criminals.
Yeah, that was the one where they would only send screenshots of file trees. And so we knew that they were in the network, but they would never send us any proof of life files. They would not, do any kind of verification. And when we looked at the actual access on the systems, I mean, it was unclear whether or not they actually got anything out the door.
Yeah.
I don't think they did, but
right.
But again, that's not something that we could prove like conclusively. So we did have to err on the side of caution there.
So typically in ransomware cases, you go through a proof of life process, just like in kidnapping. I mean, that's where it comes from, where you say, do you really have my data, or are you really able to unlock my data?
That's
depending on the scenario. So ideally, in a case where a criminal is threatening to release your information, you say, hey, prove to me that you have it. Here's 3 files, and I want you to give them to me, those 3, or something along those lines, so that I know that you have the database. And if they can't do that, then, I really question whether they've actually stolen a significant database of files.
Or they're just being jerks.
Yeah, that too. So if you are dealing with ransomware gang, hopefully you're dealing with professionals that will just work with you.
That was the weirdest thing to see.
I know. So anyway, the bottom line, to your point, stealing information is a lot less work than trying to encrypt it and then decrypt it after the fact and keep track of everything. So yeah, any other thoughts on extortion as a service or data exfiltration as a service?
No, I think we're going to see a lot more of it moving forward. So yeah.
So how can we protect ourselves and how can we adapt our response, Matt?
Well, the first is you have to practice something like this happening. So do a tabletop exercise, but make sure that if you're doing a cyber extortion tabletop exercise, you're including exfiltration of data and the threat of disclosure as part of it. That gets away from, I don't want to say it this way, but I'm going to anyway, it gets away from the IT guy cop-out of, we'll just restore from backups and so I don't care.
Yeah, and it also helps you got to exercise your group muscles.
Yeah.
And you really do need to practice the public relations bit, handling it from a business perspective and a reputational perspective as well.
Yeah, of course. The next thing is you need to watch to see if somebody does get into your network, if they're stealing data. I just had a tabletop last week where one of the conclusions we came to was the client at this point did not have the ability to monitor for data being stolen from their network. They didn't have DLP software in place. They did not have any kind of flow monitoring on the perimeter of the network. They would not have known if somebody was hijacking the data at that point. And that's like a very important thing. Also, make sure you include your cloud services too.
Often that's something that we test during penetration testing, like can we exfiltrate data? Because that's something that you want to be locked down. If a hacker's in your network, can they just steal stuff from your shares and throw it outbound? And hopefully the answer is no.
Ideally, yes. No.
Often it's actually really easy to catch too. Like every time I see a case where like, oh, large volumes of data were uploaded to mega.nz, it's like, why? Just block it. Or that one case we saw where everything was synced to a random OneDrive account.
Oh, yeah. They just connected a OneDrive folder.
Yeah, and that was exactly like this, a data exfiltration extortion case where they exfiltrated the data and then they threatened to release it, and they did ultimately release a large amount of patient information in that case.
That was rough.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a big fan of proactive work, if you can't tell, and you can proactively filter outbound. And just make sure that you've segmented your network, that important data shares are being monitored, and that you've actually just blocked data exfiltration, not just from your on-prem systems, but also from like 365 or your cloud systems as well. Because most of the time there is no need for large volumes of data to be moved from one point to another. Is that something, I'm curious, just to throw this at you, can you set up a conditional access policy on 365 that limits the volume of data that can be transferred outbound?
It's sort of. Yes, but it's not exactly that. It's basically a threshold alarm that if that data does start moving or if there is an attempt, it will notify you that is actually happening. And if you have policy set correctly and you have some automation built in, it can actually stop that transfer.
Okay, we'll do that. That's part of my takeaway.
Yes.
Your turn.
Next, make sure, and this kind of goes back around to the very first thing, but when you do run through and test your actual response policies, make sure you update them to include what modern kind of tenets of cybercrime are, and that includes the theft of your data. So yeah, make sure that your IRP is up to date. Make sure that you understand what you need to do if your data is stolen. At that point, it's much different than dealing with a standard ransomware attack.
Absolutely, and also understand your cyber insurance policy and what it covers. Often I see cases like this, data exfiltration cases, where the cyber insurance policy includes public relations and other types of support. But sometimes unless you ask the insurer for that, they won't think to offer it to you. So make sure, again, you understand what your cyber insurance policy includes. Does it include public relations support? Does it include crisis management or crisis communications? And if it does, make sure you work those triggers into your incident response policy. I have a sneaky new approach that I'm recommending to my clients. You may have new cyber insurance policies every year or every 2 years. When that happens, take that policy, throw it into your favorite AI tool, your insurance policy, along with your incident response plans, and say, hello, favorite AI tool. Given my updated policy, what should I update in my incident response plan? And see what it says. Often it's very helpful.
It almost feels like cheating.
It is cheating, but that's what we need to do. We need to leverage all the resources we have available as defenders.
That's fair.
Yeah. So with that, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Sherry Davidoff.
I'm Matt Duran.
Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for Cyberside Chats.